Hey, Net Builders. Thanks for joining us again on another episode of Net Builders. Today we have Scott Rosenblum with Level PR. He's going to give you some great value and information as you usually get on this show, but we're going to see it from a PR's point of view today. So, Scott, take the floor, please.
Great. Once again, RJ, thank you for having me on the show. It's a pleasure, an absolute pleasure to be here today on Net Builders. So just briefly, a little bit about myself. My name is Scott Rosenblum, and I am the president and founder of Level PR, a tech startup focused public relations agency. We recently celebrated our 4-year anniversary. But personally, oh, thank you. But personally speaking, though, I've been doing PR, majority of it tech PR, for well over 20 years. So even though the agency's only 4, it comes with much more experience in the background. As I like to tell people, my experience in tech PR evolved kind of like the tech industry did. First in the late 90s, early aughts in Silicon Valley, working with a lot of hardware startups, and then more later on back in New York with a lot of ad tech companies, media, digital publishing, new publishing, and then ultimately, like a lot of businesses, working more with cloud-based companies, a lot more software, a lot more SaaS companies. And it has evolved to the point today where in Level PR, I work with a lot of companies in the fintech space, e-commerce, retail tech, and a lot of other ones that don't fall into those 3 categories. Everything from precise location technologies to business analytics, business intelligence, data analytics companies, all sorts of stuff. And that's just a little bit about myself and Level PR.
Outstanding. So, quick question, get it started off. The evolution of technology has been so rapid. I mean, I remember as a kid, the highest, Atari, the ping pong, we was like, man, this is so cool. And then Super Mario came out 8-bit and we were blown away. Like, can you see the detail in that? So, I mean, tech moves so fast and so rapid. How are you able to keep up with it in order to promote people correctly, or do your public relations thing? How because I know you have to keep up with it all the time. You're probably on the forefront as far as trends and how to be able to, relate to the public. So how are you keeping up with that?
Sure, and that's a great first question, by the way. I guess the thing you got to keep in mind, whether you're doing PR for tech or PR for this or that or whatever, is no matter what your specialty is as a PR person, it's part of your job to sort of keep up with everything. Now, granted, because like you said, tech has evolved in such a rapid pace and is now just sort of part of it. When I first started this gig, it was just like wholly dedicated tech, tech news, tech section. It was usually more of the boring but important stuff like those hardware companies I mentioned. But now tech's everywhere. We have Internet of Things. There's tech in plants, tech in this, tech in your kitchen, however you choose to use it. So it's especially with that in mind, it can be kind of difficult to keep track of everything. So what advice I give, whether it be someone else starting in PR or just in general wanting to keep track of the tech news just as an observer or someone who's interested, is that you try to get a general landscape of the major news of what's going on, which is the easy part because, let's face it, there's the FANG companies, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, everybody's going to cover those, whether it be the smallest niche site or Wall Street, dedicated Wall Street Journal beat reporter. That's probably the easiest news to cover. You're going to find it everywhere because they're so big and and got even bigger during COVID. Anything they do, that's Bezos blows his nose, it's news coverage. Not that hard to keep track of. But even then, though, because of that, but the flip side is that even then, because everything they do is news, some might be more relevant. Some of that news might be more relevant to you than others. If you're in, like, I don't know, the government contracting space, when it's more of a B2B story in the journal about what Amazon's doing in that space and trying to get more government contracts with the Pentagon, that's going to be a highly relevant article for you, as opposed to the article more in the other section of tech that's talking about, that's a consumer tech story, that's a, talking about some new gadget Amazon put out, that's probably going to be less relevant, because the problem is you can't read it all. And that's also, and so beyond like the big news like that, so you narrow it down from the big news, even though you can find it everywhere, you don't have to read everything about Amazon. And then when it comes to other other companies that aren't as big as that, or even like a notch below that, it's just, from my perspective as a professional and just as any other business person, it's impossible to read it all. You can't know it all, and nor is it relevant to have to. So what I usually do then is to really focus on the industries that are relevant to the clients that I'm currently working on, and into the ones that interest me the most, where my new prospects lay. So as I mentioned, one of my big buckets is fintech. It happens to work out that I have an interest in it. I have a lot of experience with fintech clients, and I currently have one in the space. So that's the one where I'll go a little bit deeper and have several e-newsletters that are all just dedicated to the fintech space, read those stories a little bit deeper, hunt a little bit harder to find the interesting nooks and crannies. And even then I narrow it down to focus more on ones that might be related to specific within the fintech industry, because it's such a big umbrella. So it might be about, because I have a client in the credit space, so anything with that's definitely gonna, ring the bell on my radar, as opposed to an unrelated new neobank that was launched for the Taiwanese market. Not so relevant, probably not gonna focus on it. And so so that's the best advice I give, is to just really hone in when it comes to the niches and the verticals, to really hone in on who's covering what that's most relevant for your business.
Gotcha. Thanks for that info, though. Actually, thank you.
No, my pleasure.
So you said you deal with startups and already established companies.
Yes.
So is it harder to act as public relations for a startup company with almost zero reputation, or is it harder to play what would you call it? Is it harder to be the cleanup guy for somebody that's already, if Bezos does blow his nose and, there's a little boogie on the handkerchief, is it harder for you to clean that up or for a new guy just starting out?
I think in some ways they're almost equally hard, but different kind of hard, because you're talking about the difference between just sort of launching a new company, launching startup. It is difficult, especially with all the competing noise that you have to rise above these days. Sometimes it's, you just have to think of it. In some cases, I'm not just, depending of course which reporter you're trying to reach. From my perspective, sometimes you're not just competing with other startups trying to gain that same market share, but you're also competing against those big companies. So it can be difficult, and you got to find the angles. You got to find what makes it interesting and why this person should care about you, especially, of course, care about your company that you're representing, because that reporter, depending on who it is, who he or she works for, and what their beat is, they on certain publications they could be getting 200-300 PR pitches a day, and there's no way they're reading and responding to them all. So you have to find your ways to break through to capture that reporter's attention. On the flip side, you're talking, if you happen to work with an external agency that's big enough to work with, like an Amazon, or you work in their internal comms department, you're talking more about a crisis communication situation. And with that, sometimes it's even more challenging, because it's a different kind of stress. It's less about who are you, why are you here. It's it's not the 5 W's, the who, what, where, when, and why. They already know that about Amazon. It's more about, okay, it's more about the what, like what happened, what did Bezos do, and what's the ramifications, what's the impact. And being the past year or so that they've had, it could take your pick. I mean, there's been a number of stories that happened over the past year, 2 years that I'm sure kept that team and their external teams really busy. So It's a different kind of stress, and it could be, like I said, just as hard or maybe even harder, because in some ways there's a little less pressure for the startup side, because if you have the right client, they're usually really appreciative that you're starting to gain traction and you get those first couple clips and coverage, and that people are starting to care and pay attention, and you're beginning hopefully what is will become a well-oiled publicity machine that just keeps getting bigger and scaling up. Whereas that's not the issue over there. It's more about getting out the right message, getting out, in this case, Amazon's side of the story, and really controlling the narrative. Plus, also having an owner. I know he's stepping down soon, but he's got to still be part of the Amazon DNA and the board. It's having someone like that is not your usual typical founder CEO. So it's also dealing with the pressures that come from working with someone like that, the pressures of owning that narrative and getting that message out, getting it out correctly, and getting it out with somebody who runs, from what I've read, a very tight, demanding corporate environment. So it's all those type of variables that, like I said, maybe I started this discussion both sides being equal, but when depending, of course, what crisis comms you're handling and what company you're working for, that scale might start to tip a little bit the other way.
Gotcha. A guy who's just in a startup, if he does something, like you said, like if he's not known, it's really not crisis control at all. I mean, he just made a mistake as a regular guy. So
right. And in that case, when it isn't someone who's already, the Amazon almost is a bad example, because most people in my business are not doing crisis. If they're doing crisis comm or have a crisis comm moment, it's usually not for that guy in that company. It might be more for might be almost a first scenario or first time that's even happening for a company or organization you represent. So no matter what it is, the first thing to get ahead of the story is I guess the general rule number one is just be transparent from that first moment when the crisis happens. Address it. Don't try to hide it. Talk about what it is that you or the company is trying to do to help alleviate the situation, and get at it and stick with the message points and repeat it. And repetition is a very big part of it, because like anything in politics too, and political messaging, you repeat anything enough times, the message will usually start to sink in. But of course, to do that and to do that successfully, the client or the person you're working with has to be able to have that discipline and to stick with it and follow the advice of their publicist or publicist team. Because if they're doing their job right, they've laid out the strategy, they've set the course, help prepare statements. But if the person doesn't follow the advice or read the memos or whatever prep work they're doing, it doesn't matter. Then it's just it can just spiral out.
Without using any names at all, what's the craziest situation you've had to deal with?
Oh, along those lines, thankfully not too much. I will say I've been fortunate, because there's some there's a bunch of PR folks and whole communications firms and agencies. That's all they specialize in is crisis communications all day long, 5 days a week or 7 days usually, because it's crisis, and with a variety of different clients with all sorts of probably crises that would make your head spin. So I tip my hat to them. It's not an easy it can be very lucrative,
but sounds like a headache.
Yeah, it can be very stressful.
It would feel like, honestly, to me, in my mind, as you describe it, it feels like I'm the maid and I just cleaned up the house. And every time I clean up the house and I'm like, all right, my day's done, you're calling me at 9 o'clock at night and saying, hey, great job cleaning up the house. I need you to come back in right now. Why? Because I just destroyed the house all over again.
Well, it's kind of like it's the maid. Yes, you got to clean it up, but at the same time, it's the maid, and you're like, I don't know, the lawyer at the same time or so forth, giving that you're cleaning up, but you're also giving strategic counsel. So I was just trying to think. So like I said, I've had those moments. I don't specialize in it because PR itself is a pretty stressful job. We're always ranked, I think it was Forbes or something, always ranks us in the top 5 most stressful jobs yearly. We come into that. So it's stressful enough. So that's just even extra stress. I'm trying to think of a good moment. One could be, I'm not going to go in the whole story because it's a really long story and we don't have the time for that. But very, very many years ago, I got a call from a well-known reporter at the New York Times who covered the media industry at the time, and he still does, and a bunch of other stuff these days. He's gone on to even bigger and better things. He was already pretty well known, looking to speak with a client about a particular interview that he did with that the client did with Bill O'Reilly, and Bill O'Reilly was ended up, besides the interview that was used for those purposes, also ended up being part of an advertorial on involving the client that for shilling some sort of financial product, and the report was claiming that O'Reilly's camp didn't know that was part of it. So myself and so this was a surprise because we didn't know that this even happened, which sometimes happen in crisis comms. Sometimes it, you don't know in advance that the shoe's about to drop. So I worked with the president of my then agency, who was very familiar with the account and the client, and we worked with the client to basically to get the message out about the truth of the situation, which was that no, he did know, his camp knew, and he willingly did these videos. Aside from the actual interview, he did these other videos about this financial product, and became more of a, no one really wanted, became more of like a he said, she said type thing. But to say the least, for the next day, for some time afterwards, it was a bit of a stressful time, and ultimately it's just okay, whatever. It's just, it ultimately became more about a trend story about how big time, well-known, famous anchor people. Of course, he hasn't been on Fox News in quite some time, but how sometimes some of these celebrity reporters look for alternate payments and alternate ways to make money on the side of their already huge contracts, but it can end up sometimes in tricky situations. So.
That was a nice, good spin on that to deflect a little bit there, I guess.
It's the easiest way I could go about it without naming names, going into any more details. Yeah. And like I said, and that's spending another hour talking about it, because it led to other things and so forth. So, but that's like the craziest one I could think of, because like I said, most of the time I don't do crisis communications.
Gotcha. So for 4 years now, 4-year anniversary. Once again, congratulations on that, man. Like that's actually a big accomplishment. And most people that aren't entrepreneurs or business owners, they don't understand how big of an accomplishment that is. That they say that first year makes or breaks a company, and you push to 4 years. So what's the secret there?
I guess the secret is, and it's something I still struggle with on a daily basis, and hopefully won't struggle with as much as time goes on, is not to be so hard on myself, really, and to not to be so hard on myself tied into setting reasonable goals and expectations. If you set your goals and expectations too far out, I mean, it's always good to plan a year, and at the end of the year, plan for the next year. Plan with your clients, plan for whatever goals you're trying to reach and your specific company goals. But if you focus only on that, and A, it's too far out, and B, if the goal's too large, and then if you find midway through you're not going to be able to reach it no matter what you do, you'll just be disappointed. And what happens is, if you get disappointed too soon, mid through the year, oh, looks like I'm already not going to trend to get to whatever revenue number I set for myself back on January 1st. It could, you almost like you psych yourself out, and you don't, and it's just for me, it's not a good practice. So I find it's easier, and I'm trying to do it more. I did it a lot in the early days, and now I'm trying to keep it going, because it's easier to do this in the early days, which is to set those goals more by like a quarterly goal, as opposed, or sometimes even monthly, depending. Like, I had this chart where it was, by the end of, I think one point was monthly, and then I set it to quarterly. By the end of June, I hope to close at least 2 new clients of new business, and have 4 new business calls, and 2 of them are going to come from networking, and 2 of them are going to come from referrals, or however it is categorized. And I did a lot of that, particularly in the earlier stages, and I'm finding that it's best to, I'm finding I'm going to resurrect that, because I hadn't been doing it as much in the past year or so, but I'm finding it's a good practice to keep, and it helps set those goals, goals and expectations much more reasonably, and in a reasonable period of time, because it's a lot easier to keep track of a goal if it's month to month, or even a quarter, as opposed to a whole year lookout.
Definitely, and that's a question. I mean, that's a conversation I have with a lot of business owners about their business plan. The business plan is, big, thick. Revising it is something that they don't do, or reassessing their goals. And they're like, oh, I check it every year. And it's like, man, if you take COVID, for example, if you had plans during 2020, whatever those goals were, depending on your industry, every one of
Mhm.
your goals were unreasonable, just because the whole nature of, that whole situation. So,
Right.
but like you said, setting those weekly, monthly, quarterly goals makes it really easy to adjust, to be able to pivot, to be able to keep
Mhm.
your, goals reasonable. So I think that practice and what you just said, I think that's a real nice jewel that you just dropped on our audience today. Something for them to really, consider, because these are all entrepreneurs and business owners we're talking to. So I mean, these are great notes right here for them to be taken. So I appreciate that comment.
My pleasure. And also an added bonus to that is that it's not just about, I was giving sort of the negative side, like, oh, kind of change, no, it's not going to be as much revenue. It could also go the opposite way. Suddenly you might have set more you might have purposely set some more modest goals. And then you find after looking at the metrics, oh, I exceeded it. I always thought I was going to get 4 new interviews. I had 8. 2 new clients. I closed 4. Oh, maybe I could, maybe I could be more aspirational. And next month's goals are like, all right, maybe 6 interviews, or whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. So it could go net positive as well.
And I like the fact that you said that as well, because there are a lot of people that will exceed their goal expectations halfway in the month and then say, oh, I reached my goal, I reached my quota, time to sit back. Instead of saying, you know what, I did that in half the month, let's double those results. You know what I mean? There's a lot of people that will take that as, oh, I can go on vacation now.
No, I understand, and it's that's an easy trap to fall into. Is you don't have to drive yourself crazy with it either. Like you don't have to be checking those metrics or those goals every 5 minutes. It's kind of like the equivalent to be, if you have a website, your e-commerce company or whatever that's really reliant and needs a lot of site visitors and users. You could get lost in the sauce just checking those metrics on Google Analytics or whatever your tool that you use is almost every 5 minutes, numbers going up, more users coming in, and that's an easy way to drive you crazy. So it's good to have those goalposts and whatever those things you're trying to accomplish, but you don't have to check them all the time either.
Good point. Good point. So back to PR. Back to PR. No, I'm really enjoying that conversation actually. Goal setting.
Oh,
I
right.
love it. I love that conversation.
Me
So
too.
what are the benefits of having a public relations specialist?
It's a great question. I'd say the benefit, one of the biggest benefits is getting your company, or if you're an individual, your individual or a company's narrative out there, really getting their stories out there, in the ideally when it works, to the key audiences company or said person is trying to reach. And not just to get it out there, but when it's really working, to get it out there consistently, so that because what happens is it becomes one of those things where it just sort of aids and helps your company's marketing efforts, whether it be if you're a less sophisticated company or if you have a whole marketing team. It's only going to help. It's only going to help. Ideally, when it's working, ideally close whatever that business is you're trying to close, whether it be consumer facing or B2B, because then it could then be, utilize, or we used to say, some of my other agencies, it could be literally merchandised, and not merchandise like in an actual product, but merchandise as in utilized for various marketing means. So let's say, argument's sake, you get a nice coverage in some key outlet. It could then it's then incumbent on, if you have a marketing person or marketing team, to then get that out there in all the means possible. It could be, in social media, if there's a dedicated social person, or that one marketing person's doing social, it's tweeting it out, getting on LinkedIn pages, everything that, or Instagram, if it's something more consumerish. But then it's also, making sure you send it out to your blast email list of, I don't know, 5,000 customers and prospects, especially some of those that you might not have talked with in a long time. So it's doing stuff like that. Having your sales team enabled to, they could put that on their signature, XYZ, Brian Johnson, SVP of new business. So let's learn about let's learn about XX company, recently featured in Forbes, and it has the link and it's hyperlinked. So that's what I mean by it could be merchandised and utilized in different ways, things like that. And And then of course, it could also be used internally. If you're a big enough company, it could be used internally. It's sent to like the board, or sent to your various investors, or key stakeholders is probably a better general term to use. Because even though they're keeping track of your company, what if there was stakeholders, or investors, whatever, they might work with multiple different companies. They might not be have a Google alert set up just for your company as is. But if they get that email from the founder, or one of the key C-suite members they know, they're like, oh wow, no, great job, that's great, you were featured in Forbes or what have you. So it really could work in multiple directions, both externally and internally. And then ideally on the external side, will it sometimes lead to direct sales? Sometimes you can't. We are fortunate enough to measure that and be able to see direct. At the least, you can, in some cases, if it's a big enough coverage, a company can say, oh, on that day, our web guy saw, the analytics guy saw that the web traffic went up by 50%, and so on and so forth. So in that case, and if it's a big enough outlet, you could, without getting too scientific, you can make that assumption that, oh yeah, because that's the day we appeared in the New York Times. Not surprisingly, that's when the bump happens. But it usually doesn't come like that, nor does it come from, oh, that's the day the bump happened, somebody read it and emailed that SVP of business sales that I mentioned, and now there's a new prospect call set up. Sometimes it happens, but it's not how it should usually be viewed. It's usually more the cumulative effect. That's what I was saying earlier. Getting publicity is nice, but getting publicity consistently over a longer period of time is even nicer, because then when someone does a search and it's not so direct as that big Times article hypothetical, it's more about they do a search for, let's say, whatever it is your company does or this person does, and then that company comes up, or some of those, top cloud providers or this or that, and then it comes up in searches. And then when someone drills down some more and they do a search on that company, they'll see a whole bunch of articles that could run for a couple, doing it right, it could be like a couple years worth of, interesting coverage and good coverage about the company. And they were like, and then they don't even have to read all those articles to get the impression, oh, this company's really has a presence in this space, and it starts to build that impression. So that's how it's sort of, so it's that cumulative, repetitive effect that really begins to build the brand, not only to build that brand awareness, but to then establish that brand as either the lead player in that space or one of. That's the ultimate goal. And it only comes through ideally sustained efforts. And which leads to the second part of I know it's a long answer, but it leads to the second part of your question, why hire it? To do that, everything I just said is everything I just mentioned takes time. It takes time and dedicated efforts. And most, from a startup perspective, at least most startup founders don't have, it's great if they have a moment here or there to email that reporter at TechCrunch that they like and talk about, oh, I saw all these great articles about this industry. Would you like to learn more about us? I just founded blah, blah, blah. And don't get me wrong, reporters like that too. They love to talk directly to founders, but the problem is most of them just don't have the time because they're trying to build a new company, trying to scale up, or if they're looking for investors, they're trying to, they're busy on their road shows and pitching, their pitch decks, trying to raise capital. So, and then do this, and then operations, and and especially the smaller the company is, if it's first founded, they're really doing a lot. They haven't gotten to the point, most of them at the early stage haven't gotten to the point where it's just like, oh no, they could pass, they could have a dedicated person doing this, or a dedicated CEO. If you're lucky, you might have a small team of 1 to 5 people. So when you have that in mind, you usually don't have the time to dedicate really strong efforts to doing your own PR, or B, you might feel like you don't have the aptitude for it. It's not the hardest thing in the world, but it does require certain skills and a certain skill set that some founders, particularly in the tech world, just aren't comfortable with, which is, in some cases, dogged persistency, to be able to hear no a lot or nothing at all, which happens a lot from the media that you're pitching, and also to really not be afraid to put yourself out there as a representative of said whatever company or person you're representing and to be, to sort of be outgoing. And granted, PR is not just media relations, it's also a lot of strategy, strategic communications, it's a lot of writing, it's content development, there's social and this and that stuff. But even that stuff requires a mindset that some tech founders just might not have the aptitude for,
Oh,
or
definitely.
if they do, they don't know it yet and might at least need some assistance to help bring it out.
I'm a big tech guy all the time, and I know so I'm really introverted, as most tech guys are. Most programmers, most tech guys, they're introverts. I do this web series because I like to help entrepreneurs, but I was also doing this to kind of break that phobia, I guess.
Yeah, that's great.
Start talking, But on a normal day, this camera's off. I'm a pretty quiet guy. So I can't imagine a lot of tech guys being able to reach out. I want to be in the public's eye. I want to talk. I'm sure they know that it's something that's very essential for the growth of their company. But at the same time, they're like, I'll get to it tomorrow. I'll send that email out tomorrow. I'll try it tomorrow. So with that said, at what stage do you think ideally a company should reach out to say, hey, I need a PR?
Oh, that's the $1 million question. Oh, that's a great question. And one I've heard many times, and it could be kind of tough. The the inside baseball answers right now. You need PR right this instant. Ka-ching. What? Your company just started yesterday, and you have no funding, and you don't have you don't have an MVP ready, or this, or a website, or just a 404. No, it's okay. Now you need it now. No, you need PR now. So that's the joke answer, but I find, at least in the world that I play in, I find ideally it's a startup that or a company that's just a little bit further along than that stage, but hasn't really gone out with a lot of the major announcements yet. There can be such thing as like, oh, you just missed it as well. I've had situations where worked with a client where it was a little too soon and they didn't have a viable product yet, and like it was all about, oh, this is what's coming. And I remember seeing this one client, it was like the bare bones of a really cool technology, but it just wasn't quite there. And ultimately, long after they weren't a client, it got there, but it was like 6 months later. So in that brief time I worked with them, we couldn't really, we couldn't reveal what it was behind the curtain. And if we did, it wouldn't come out right on the first impression, because anyone reviewing it or checking out the tech would be like, this is just not there yet. It has a lot of potential, but not there yet. The only time you can really maybe get away with that is if you're a very big company, and then you could talk about like prototypes without it being, they give you more of a pass with that. But if it's a company you don't know, you don't get that. So we were just bound to only be able to help them create byline articles in the founder's name about various related topics of that tech, but that can only stretch so far for a certain period of time. And usually you do that in conjunction with a lot of other tactics. So that's the one example, was something too soon. And then I've had plenty of times where a client joins up and be like, oh, wish we worked with you a month ago. We announced our Series A funding. We just launched new product with a big client you probably heard of. These guys or gals. And it's like, yeah, we got like 1 or 2 articles on our own, but would have been great to work with you then. I'm like, well, then why weren't you working with us or anybody else for that matter at that time? And that's the other thing too. Sometimes it's a little bit after the fact. It's finding that sweet spot of where I find the sweet spot usually with a startup is they have the product is done, but it might still be in beta. They've put up some blog posts or some LinkedIn announcements or whatever, and but they do already have a growing user base. Whether or not they're even making profit or not, that's almost sort of bonus, and it's not even expected. But if there's at least the seeds for growth are there, and they're already seeing, just based on the limited awareness that we have and that we purposely push in the time that in this beta period, they were started 2 months ago, we went from, family and friends just being the only ones using it to suddenly we have 30,000 users. And all of a sudden, like, whoa, okay. So they're at a point where there's already growth, there's already a story there, and now we're on the cusp of we finally finished our a roadshow, and now we're on the cusp of announcing this big funding round, and so on and so forth, and the formal launch of whatever product. So I find that's usually sort of the sweet spot, at least for a startup, to engage with someone, engage with someone like myself, where we're just where you could, it doesn't always work out that way. There's not always the VC funding is not always there, the launch is not always there. Sometimes I work with companies right after that, which is fine too, or even more established. It's just a matter of defining the objectives and figuring out what you want to accomplish and what audience you want to reach, even if you're well past that launch stage. So I think that's the key, no matter what. So and I guess that leans a little bit more towards, you can come a little bit later to the party. It's just as opposed to it being much trickier when there's just not enough there yet.
That really is a sweet spot there. Like, like, yeah, I was always under the impression before this explanation that you gave me, which actually shed a lot of light on that whole situation. But I was always under the impression like it was like life insurance. It's like everyone keeps telling me I need it, I should get it, I know that they exist. All right, now I need it. Oh my God, it's too late. I was always under the impression that PR was like that. Like you wait until the worst happens, or wait until a product is, ready to release, and there's somebody trying to release a product similar to yours, but you want to get out in front of the audience, get out in front of your market first, and then you're like, now I need a PR. Why didn't I think about this before?
And that's a nice thing. And sort of the other part of this too, of your question, is I don't want to give the wrong impression that either to someone who might be watching this and thinking, oh, it's time to start planning PR, even though I know we won't be there for another year. It doesn't have to be that far out either. It's good to be prepared, but the nice thing about you work with most PR professionals or agents and so forth, it usually doesn't take that long to ramp up. And it usually, we usually don't need that much advance time. Like if I had clients who are like, we're getting excited. We can't wait for you guys to publicize this new product. Oh, great. Yeah, that sounds, we'd love to hear it. Tell us all about it. Oh, well, really, technically, we're looking 6 months from now. I'm like, 6 months from now? We don't need that much advance time if it's not going to be ready then. Tell us closer to more like a month, maybe a month and a half out the most.
Wow.
We usually, unless it's something so big, and now granted that could change depending on scale. If it's one of those big companies, one of the big tech companies we talk about rolling out some huge new product that they think is going to be the killer to one of their adversaries, then it gets much more complicated, and you might need that 2-3 months or more to plan if it's involving multiple moving parts and multiple marketing teams working with PR teams in this. And, especially if it's something consumery like the old pre-COVID days where, it's like a red carpet reveal or like a movie and there's a thing going on and, in the middle of Times Square coordinated with the actual, the press tour and this, then you're having a lot of moving parts. Then it's much more expensive and it's a total, but for the companies I work with on the smaller company scale or startup scale, that's not necessary, and that's not something you have to worry about. It's a totally different animal, if you will.
Gotcha. So I appreciate that. So the people listening right now, if they wanted to hire you, what would be the process that they would go through to get started up?
Well, I think, are you talking about, they've already, they've already fallen in love with me and they're ready to hire, or they're just talking about the process of just some doing their due diligence and learning about who's out there, and I'm one of 3 or 4 companies they're going to talk with?
No, you specifically.
Oh, well, I guess what they can expect if they were to hire me, we've got past the wooing stage, if you will, and I've sent them the letter of agreement. They signed it, sent them the first invoice. We're ready to go. No matter what kind of company I'm working with and whom I'm working with, I guess first steps after that initial thing is I always send them a welcome letter. How great to be working with Level PR, and these are some of the things you need to that'll be helpful to know to start our relationship, et cetera, which I always find is a nice thing to do. But then right after that, or right around that time, we set the first kickoff meeting. Now, I will say some of it's some of it could be a little redundant, because in that first kickoff get to know you meeting, depending how long the new business process has gone on, I might already know a little bit about you. If this is, we had 3 or 4 calls already, or you made me meet, everybody on the C-suite. Okay, but at other times that's not the case. Other times it might have been maybe 1 call if lucky, or 2 at the most. Could usually just be, most of the time it usually just is 1 call, work the proposal, send it, and then, they make a decision. So in that case, yeah, I already know a little bit about the company, but there's still a lot you haven't told me that we didn't do in the new business process. So, and so that's why we set that first call, usually set an hour or so, to really learn everything I can, even if it means learning stuff I already know, and finding out all the sort of nitty gritty details of what's coming down the pipeline, so it can really plan a more detailed strategy. Sometimes in the new business process, some clients want a full strategic document, and it's really kind of hard to, I really blanch at doing that, because it's kind of hard to do that without knowing every single thing that's coming. It was still going to be in broad general strokes. And even then things might change, because sometimes the process takes long to close. So what if, from the point of you send out a proposal to the point the LOA is signed, could be a month or 2 or so. A lot of things startups move fast. A lot of things can happen in a month or so. Well, what they thought was going to happen when we were hypothetically starting is now going to happen later. Something else is going to happen. So that's where you need that first meeting to really, and once everyone's engaged and you're locked in a partnership, that's that first meeting to really help flesh it out, see what's coming, and also to learn every nook and cranny as possible about the company. And that's what I always say is that, send me everything, send me all the information, every document you have, even if it's stuff that you think is boring and doesn't make sense. You never know when I might find a thing where, oh yeah, here's this thing we announced this a couple months ago. It's not that big a deal. I might look at it, no, this actually is interesting. This is a big deal, because they might be viewing it through one lens. I'm viewing it through a very different lens, a publicity lens.
Well, they can't do your job. That's why they need you there.
Exactly. So first and foremost, that meeting. And then after that, it usually involves coming up with a said strategy document. This is all like first month, coming up with the first strategy document. And then more often than not, especially since in a lot of cases, a company I'm working with, this is the first time they've worked with someone like myself, a messaging document, a messaging matrix, or whatever you want to call it, where it's almost like a Q&A, like, what is XYZ? Why I should care about XYZ? And then more specific questions, and then sort of the ideal answers and explanations of of the answers to those questions. And it's usually an internal document, but parts of it can be used for both any internal messaging that they might be working on, or I could use in my pitches that go outbound to the media. So I usually do that. Or if they're more advanced and they already have their own messaging, it might be more to augment what they already have, or to review what they have, or to add on to it if they feel it needs another set of eyes. And like I said, that depends. And that's usually for a company that's further along. Then also and this doesn't always happen right away, but sometimes it does right after the messaging and the strategy, is if it's the right time, I like to do some media training. If needed too. Sometimes I'm dealing with founders who are more familiar with PR, a little more PR savvy, have done media interviews, and maybe it's been a while and they might just need a brush up. So then it could wait a little bit until we book our first interview, and then I could go through a quick and dirty media training session. But in other cases, for founders who've never done it before, it helps to have a dedicated session where we go through the best practices and do's and don'ts of conducting a media interview, whether it's something like this on a Zoom these days, over the phone, or TV, podcast, radio. I will say it could really get in the woods with this type of stuff. And sometimes, just even doing an hour or 2 hours or sometimes more might not be enough. So if they really want to go deep, then we could always contract to a dedicated media trainer, who there's people out there, that's all they specialize in. And that's when you get into the room with them and they have the video camera on you and you practice all these different interview scenarios and this and that. But it's I don't know, COVID, companies still coming out of COVID, that might not be as easy as to set up as it used to be, when you just needed a board, you just needed conference room somewhere to set that up in some dedicated block of time. I mean, that's usually something that's usually not needed, something like that, but the option exists. But and then right around that time, oh, and also around this time, at the same time, a new client could expect that I'm in behind the scenes working on building out my media lists that targeting the right media that we're trying to reach. Usually either sometimes from scratch, but more often it's lists that I already have, updating those or amending them or adding on to them depending on the type of media that I'm targeting. And even after that first media list is established, I could say it's an active document that I constantly update while I'm, throughout whatever the period of time is I'm working with said client, because people change everybody changes jobs, media do too. So you never know when one reporter at this outlet might leave to another one. You got to update the list accordingly. Or so those are like the main things. And then of course usually by the end of the month or the middle, it's actually going into proactive pitching of whatever stories or implementing implementing the tactics that the strategy dictates that I already helped create in the beginning of the month. I mean, and granted, so those are the general things they could expect. And granted, some of those, the order of those items might change, of course, depending on timing and priorities. Sometimes I might not have quite the luxury to go into a messaging doc because they hired me, and now like it's one of those situations where they should have maybe hired me a week or two before, and we're diving right in because we have this big first announcement that has to go out because they already pushed it off too long, and everybody wants this thing to go already, but they at least wanted to be able to have someone like myself be able to handle it. So in that case, some of that other stuff that I mentioned might get put to the side for the moment, and I just dive right in. But other times but more often than not, that's not always the case, and it's usually more of as I call it, the ready, aim, fire. And this is the ready and aim part, and then fire. It's when all this stuff is done, and we start implementing the strategy and reaching out for various opportunities depending what we're trying to achieve.
Sounds good. Well, thank you. Thank you for giving us the process, that rundown there. I know that was a question that was on my mind before we even started. So I imagine if I'm asking that question, they're asking that question too. So I wanted to get it out there. So how would if one wanted to acquire your services, how would they be able to reach you?
I'd say the best bet is my email address, scott@levelpr.co.
Gotcha. And the website is going to be Level PR?
Yeah, it's www.levelpr.co.
.co. I knew that was something. That's why I asked, because I remember reading. I was like, it's not .net. It's one of them.
No, it's one. Yes, it is one of the newer email architecture suffixes, but I like to think it's one that's catching on a little bit more. It's than the traditional .com. It does. That's why I always stress it. It does throw some people for a loop because we're so used to .com for so many decades at this point.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely through my email address, or you can check my website. I also have my profile on LinkedIn, Scott Rosenblum, and Level PR has a Twitter feed, and I have my own personal one, that SD Rosenb. But that one I will, if someone's looking for PR tidbits, you're usually not going to get it from that one, because that one's these days is supposedly me, rejoicing that the Sixers won since it's the NBA playoffs, and that's my team. So you might not you might not find any PR nuggets in that one unless you're a Sixers fan, I guess.
Outstanding. Hey, Scott, we're about to head out soon, but before we do, what do you think is the biggest nugget or gem that that the audience should take away from this conversation today?
I'd say that's a great question. Biggest gem takeaway, I'd say, would be to I guess if you do decide that your company or you personally are ready for PR representation, the best thing you should keep in mind is that you're not just hiring another vendor or someone to come in to fix your plumbing. Nothing against plumbers, but you're hiring a partner. You're really hiring, if you find the right person and you have that, and you could really begin the beginning of a great relationship with a partner who's really going to get to understand your business, understand the drive behind your business, why your company and why you and your company do what you do, and why that story and those stories need to be told in order to get that brand name awareness, that company awareness out there. And if if you view the partnership that way, in that way, with that level of importance, it'll be something that not only that both sides take seriously, but that could really reap the rewards that you're hoping to ultimately reap with hiring someone like myself, which is, adding and bringing in the elements that could only help accelerate your company's growth to reach whatever goal it is you're trying to reach. And with that, and keeping that in mind, it's to really treat your your PR agency, your PR person or team or whatever it is on that, on that level, because when you view them as a partner, you're not afraid to, if you have a board one day, you're not afraid to introduce them to the board or introduce them to other stakeholders. You consider them equals, you consider them true partners and valuable resources as a partner would be, as opposed to, oh, just a vendor. It's someone we call up when needed. We like them and all that, but it's not someone we deal with all the time, and we certainly want to introduce them to everybody. It's not even, and sometimes it doesn't even happen on purpose. It's just it's just human nature. So
Yeah.
I feel if you view that through a different lens, it could really just be the beginning of a long and fruitful process.
I love it. I love it, man. I appreciate it. I think that was actually a great tad bit of advice right there too. So hey, I
Thank you.
appreciate it. Thank you, Net Builders, for joining us today. Thank you, Scott, for joining us today. Thank you for all the knowledge you dropped on us. Very well appreciated. I know our audience appreciates it. And say bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you again. And thank you to the Net Builders community. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yes, sir.